Yeah, I'm Jackson. I have zero experience with carpentry.
I studied at a school for historic preservation in Boston and learned about how things were built, 250 years ago.
There's a long way to go. I'm nowhere near the top. Not that I thought I was, but there's so much more to do out there.
Welcome back to another episode of the Passion for Craft podcast. This episode is brought to you by Thomas Jefferson, the 6th president of the United States of America.
No.
Third?
Third?
Wow, I didn't know that. All right, well, Brent, we're going to pass it over to you because Richard and I are excited to learn about TJ.
One
thing I do know from last episode is he did UVA.
He did.
Which is probably my favorite architectural marvel in the United States. What about you, Richard?
You and a lot of other people.
Yeah, I would agree.
So we did that one on Washington. So this is the bookend for that talk that we did. And it was because I discovered that Washington was really involved in the design and the building of his house. A gentleman architect, I think we could argue, and was the second president who I discovered was an architect. About, 5 or 10 years ago, there was a couple books by a guy named Hugh Howard.
Do you have him here?
No.
Frantically before the episode, Brent was searching for these books. He was talking to his phone. Thomas Jefferson architecture book. Behind the scenes.
Yeah, thanks, Jackson.
Behind the scenes and under the bus.
True. So Hugh Howard wrote 2 books. One, Thomas Jefferson Architect, and then another one called Dr. Kimball and Mr. Jefferson. And so basically what happened is Jefferson has an incredible architectural heritage, okay? Not only Monticello, but UVA campus and, Virginia architecture. I was just there on a consulting job, and the guy's like, Jefferson influenced everything. And he did. And the architecture of that area is Jeffersonian, right, because of the things that he was doing. So he was incredibly influential and, an incredible man, the writings and all the other things he did. What was interesting about Hugh Howard's book is that it wasn't always known that Jefferson was the architect of Monticello and these other places. And so it came as a surprise in about the 1930s as a architectural historian, a guy named Fisk Kimball. At first it was like, no way. And he's like, yeah, he was. And it took quite a bit of convincing, showing papers, showing things he wrote, showing letters and correspondences. And Fisk Kimball, who wrote a number of books on historical things, he was the curator of the Philadelphia Museum in Philadelphia.
Yeah.
And he was a very influential historian and architectural critic and everything else. And he basically proved to everybody that Jefferson was the architect.
So Jeffersonian wasn't a name for an architectural style pre-Fisk Kimball?
That's correct.
Wow. So I guess I'm a little bit confused. How can someone have built, I guess not built, but designed a whole bunch of things that were going to be built, and then no one knows? You know what I mean? How did that get lost to time? Is that...
Well,
Isn't that kind of crazy?
Yeah, I think we sit here in 2023, or 100, 200 years later, and we're like, everybody knows that. And the fact is that Mount Vernon, Washington's home, nearly got bulldozed, right? Nearly was,
Really?
Yeah, and the Mount Vernon Ladies Society basically came along and said, we've got to save this thing, right? It was same with Monticello. There was a guy who came along and bought Monticello from Jefferson out of bankruptcy, and he went bankrupt a couple times. He was a terrible financial manager, and so he is either is in a family. I don't know if it was from Jefferson that they bought it from, but basically it was in bankruptcy, and this guy came along and bought it, and then basically maintained it until it got turned over to the state of Virginia, and I think the National Park Service has it now.
Wow.
But those things don't happen, right? And so come early 1900s, I can't remember when the Mount Vernon Ladies Society started, 1936 or something like that, maybe earlier than that. And so part of that was America turning 200 years old. Or 150 years old in 1926, and so a lot of interest in our history and everything else going back to that. So,
wouldn't there be like some kind of documentation though? Because I'm with you.
Right.
I'm like, how does that just go unknown?
well, that's what happened though. That's Kimball discovered it is because through documentation, through reading his letters, through reading his stuff. So if you think that Jefferson's home, goes back to the family, kind of goes into disrepair. This guy buys it and basically, rescues it. He dies in 1826 or 1830, something like that.
Is that Jefferson or
Jefferson?
Kimball?
Okay. And so it's in the family. I'm making these things up till the 1850s, 1860s. Civil War happens. Everybody forgets about it. There's depression and everything in 1890. And so it's not till the early 1900s that you begin to start thinking about these things. They restored the UVA campus with McKean, Mead, and White, the architects out of New York. And so all of a sudden it's like, who did design this? Because this is really pretty awesome. And so it takes an architectural historian to go back and start looking at things going, well, who did?
Yeah.
And so they look at letters and letters of Jefferson, and drawings that Jefferson made of the campus and what it was supposed to be. And so that's what those two books are about, is just, one, how Kimball kind of proved it, and then two, the legacy of Jefferson.
Did he just dust off some books in the attic or something? That's what I'm envisioning.
Yeah.
Like he's just like, what's this box? What?
Yeah, I can't remember. It's been 10 years since I read the book.
Mm-hmm.
It's but I was fascinated by it, and it is something like that.
Yeah.
It was maybe it was when they were redoing the library at UVA in the early 1900s that they found letters and found correspondences from him to the workmen and everything else. Now, what's interesting is that Jefferson writes a letter in the 1780s. He has this whole collection of letters, letters to Virginia or letters of Virginia or something. And in the letters in 1780, he writes and says, Virginia is without any craftsman, without anybody who understands architectural design, without anybody who understands how to build properly. It is a notes in the state of Virginia. Austin, you rock, dude. So he writes these notes, and then the letter in that thing in 1780, he basically says, building sucks, craftsmen suck, no one's building good, no one understands good design, and it needs to change.
That sounds like passion for craft. He was the first one.
I've used it as an example before in talks, basically saying, look, we've been here before. We've been at times in our American history where we really didn't understand design, where we forgot design and forgot beauty and everything else. We need to get back to that.
And then have a revival.
And so
Are you trying to get yourself compared to Thomas Jefferson? Is that why we're talking about him right now?
I'm just like him. No.
Yeah. Notes on the United States.
That will not go. I will not recognize that with a comment. And so realize that then by 1820, okay, after he's done UVA, done Monticello, he has established this legacy and this Jeffersonian architecture. And so in about a 40-year period, okay, that's really, our clock is ticking, right? So if you figure bad design, or we started, crying about how bad craft was in, 2010, we've got 30 more years to start turning the ship around. And,
right.
I'm encouraged that there are guys out there that are like, thank you. We didn't know this. There's good things going on. So anyway, side note there to just say that we've been in this place before, and, there is good things that are going to happen. Now, how did it happen? So Jefferson, remember, he was the third president. He was also the ambassador to France. He was also, all these other things. Okay, so all of these things pulling him away from home. Okay, and then after he's president, I think, and he's trying to go to Monticello, he keeps getting interrupted. Okay, people
Trying to go home.
People coming to see him, people come to bugging him and everything else, and so he builds this thing called Poplar Forest. Okay. And Poplar Forest is kind of his ranch house. It was a weekend retreat. And
Poplar, like the wood.
Okay.
And
so Poplar Forest is this house. It's a retreat. They've restored it now, but I don't think there's even plumbing or anything else in it. It was a very rustic, rural retreat. You can see it's hinting at Monticello, but it's a classical building, and they are. It's kind of like a mini Monticello, right? Mm-hmm. And so
I love the octagonal shapes.
That was his retreat. That was his place that he went to be by himself and write and do other things like that. But obviously, okay, if we look at this architecture, what is it inspired by?
The White House.
What is it inspired by?
Monticello.
What is it inspired by?
Sorry, are you talking about?
Like
inspired by Palladio, right? Like Greek.
Yeah. Thank you, Richard.
Yeah, what Richard
The Apprentice strikes out.
Really boffed that one.
Try
again next time.
He basically, it's thought that when he was in France, okay, as an ambassador, it's known that he went on a mini grand tour, okay, and there was
in France or in
France.
Okay.
When he was ambassador in France, he took a little tour. I don't know if he got down to Italy, but he certainly went to see some of the ruins and I'm getting all these from memory.
This is great. This is a great memory you've got. If you make it up too, that'll be fun.
And so he basically was inspired by looking at some of the Roman ruins that were in France and Italy and other places like that, and became a classicist and understood the importance of Palladio. He was the one, we said in another one, that Palladio was my Bible. Okay, so anytime anybody would write to him, and so I believe he also did. James Madison's house, and so which is also in Virginia, and these people would ask him, what should I do? What should I do? It's just like Palladio's our Bible. We're gonna do these things, and so he basically looked at these classical. There's Madison's house, and it's very Jeffersonian. That temple front that comes out. And if we look at the the Virginia State House, it too is a temple front kind of
temple
classical
front
design.
look. I've just never realized it. Having it called a temple front, I see that on so many houses, but I've never put two and two together. But it really does have that
Greek
cool
temple.
look. Yeah.
So, the Greek temple is incredibly influential. I mean, most churches, early New England churches are the Greek temple. And then James Gibb put a steeple on top of the St. Martin's in the Field in London.
What is this building? Sorry.
That's that's the Virginia State House.
Okay.
And so Jefferson did that too. But you begin to see, his influences and his designs. But there's St. Martin's in the Field, which is a Greek temple, right? You see the Greek temple below. And then what James Gibb did in the 1730s or 20s is he put a steeple on it. He classicized it, right, with the steeple. So, and that becomes the model for the churches everywhere, okay? Mm-hmm. And so the New England church is the model after this St. Martin's in the Field. And so but the temple front and this classicism is incredibly influential in the 17 and 1800s. And so Jefferson obviously was inspired by that. And so I say all those things because, look, he's involved in, the UVA, he's involved in Monticello, Poplar Forest, James Madison's house, right?
Got his hands in a lot of pots.
Okay, so what happens at Monticello? Here's a little quiz. How long, I think you guys know the answer to this because I think I said it. How long did it take him to finish Monticello?
He didn't finish it.
Ooh, is it a trick question?
No.
Oh, I thought maybe you had it. 40 years? He was running through the history earlier. I should
I'm
have paid
going
attention
to
to what he
do
was
Price is Right and say 39 years.
39.
You should have gone above.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Wow.
It took like 47 years. And so one of the things that would happen is he'd have what you said.
Yes.
One of the
Come
things,
on down.
One of the things that would happen, he would leave, and his workmen were afraid to,
Do anything
because they knew when he came back, he'd just make them change it. And so literally he got into things like nailing patterns, as I remember from the book.
Did he really?
Yes, like it was even saying you need to have this many nails per board and different stuff. So he was the ultimate meddling, homeowner, who was just a nightmare, so much so that the workmen are like, dude, I'm not doing anything when you're gone because you're just going to make me change it.
Yeah,
and
like
so,
you need to be here to micromanage us.
Yeah, you can't micromanage me from afar. We don't have FaceTime.
So what you have is a is a 3-part, construction there. You have the two outbuildings on the right, okay, and the main building in the center, right? And so you have an A, B, and C parts. A in the middle, okay. B, the 2 outside wings, and then C, the wings that catch the connectors, okay. And this is a Palladian layout, okay. This and it's a B, C, A, C, B, right?
Man,
so
those sloped things. That just makes me happy. Those are really cool.
And so this was in Vicentia, right? Now this model, okay, is the Palladian model, okay, the typical model. Now, if we go back to Monticello, that picture, right? What do you think those 2 little outbuildings are, right?
That's B.
And so you have this center A, right? You have the 2 Bs, and then the C is this deck. Now, you also see chimneys coming through that deck.
Yeah.
And so essentially what Jefferson did was he sunk that whole working area down into the ground. And so his piano noble is that first floor.
Can you explain to me what that is? His piano noble?
So if you go back to the Barbaro picture,
okay.
Have you ever heard the word piano noble?
I think I've heard you mumble it before, but
the piano noble is like the important floor, the noble floor.
So he sunk his important floor to the ground?
To the ground, okay? Because what essentially the way this is laid out is that this is a working farm. I think I explained out one of my other things. You guys weren't listening. This was a working house, right? And so you had, like on the left side, it's actually a dovecote, right? And so they were making fertilizer. They were, cows, and it looks very elegant, like this was working farm.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Right? And this is the invention that Palladio kind of came up with, is of this noble farmhouse, this wonderful farmhouse where you could entertain and have these wonderful things, but on the
wings,
working levels, right? It was also a farm. Okay,
so it's like a business too, like
totally.
House.
It was a business. It was a business house, right? And so the whole term piano noble is that once you walk upstairs to that first level, you're all of a sudden in a very elegant house, right? So.
Sorry, when you're saying first floor, do you mean the top floor, like the second floor?
The second floor in that picture was called the piano noble.
It's piano noble.
Yes. Do you want to Google it?
I'm just like, wow, I've always known piano as like a instrument.
Well, it is a different language, Jackson. And so, funny.
Hold on, what?
Amazingly, there's a different word for everything. Okay. So what he did was so you'd look at that and you don't immediately recognize the Palladian influence, right? But then when you realize how he sunk it down, you're like, oh, it's almost exactly like that.
The working floor is now underground.
Yes.
And then the piano noble.
And so if you go visit there, right, that's where all the working farm parts of this thing are, is underneath there.
Where is is it Virginia?
This is in Virginia.
So, I mean, I also imagine, I know in Colorado they use the ground to somewhat insulate as well. I wonder if that was also a heating efficiency thing too, to just sink it in the ground.
Yeah, that would
be.
Well, and maybe it just was a happy little accident where it was like, hey, we sunk it down for looks, and then it actually happened. Form and function.
Yeah, I actually don't know that.
It looks really good with that first level being
Well, this
so
angle is
low.
great because you can see that lower level with the brick columns and the
Totally.
white underneath there.
It's just so pretty.
Yeah, it's a
Kind of like
beautiful house.
it reminds me of like even in like historical houses around here, you have a servants area like tucked away.
Right.
You know,
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
kind of the same idea.
Man, there's so many geometric shapes that are in play here that are just so satisfying together. And man, I never would have thought like even just the idea of doing like he's got these hexagonal
Oh,
things.
look at that. Interesting. It does say piano nobile.
Means noble floor, noble level, also sometimes referred to referred to by the corresponding French term bel
That's what I
étage.
remembered it as.
That's yeah. I'm with Richard. That's what I thought it was.
Oh, I've always called that the belletage. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, the belletage. It's belletage. That's where I was getting confused.
Oh, you mean the belletage. Oh, okay. Sorry.
Sorry, I don't speak Roman.
I think it's Italian, Jackson.
No, it's Roman.
Okay.
Moving on.
Moving on.
Okay, so Thomas Jefferson, the belletage.
Okay, here's the other thing, okay, is you have Jefferson, he also does UVA. And UVA, as we talked about in the previous episode, is this classical, it's called the Academial Village, okay, which is basically
Academial.
Academial. Here you go again. Dude, will you stop?
He's just trying to get
I did
clips.
as a joke that time.
And so what you have is here's the plan, right? And the organization and beauty of it, okay, is this plan. Okay, one, you have the main library there at the top, where which is the deal. Oh, look at that! There's a historic drawing. Wow. And what you have is this lawn, opening up between all of them. You have the big houses on either side are teaching houses, are the teachers' houses. That's where the teachers live and taught. Okay, the little
That's crazy.
the little runway in between has these little tiny rooms that are probably 10 by 15 that are where the students live. And it's an honor your senior year to actually live on the lawn, and they don't have any bathrooms in these rooms. You have to walk down, outside back to a outhouse thing to go do the bathroom and everything else. But it's this big honor to, live in those things, and students still do. The other thing that's above is you'll notice there's gardens in the back, right? There's these organized gardens in the back. And so, this is, early 1800s when he does this, and today it was voted, the most significant architectural wonder in America is UVA campus with the lawn and everything else here. So it's beautifully styled, it's beautifully organized, it's beautifully, it's beautiful, and I've probably been there 3 or 4 times just because it's so fun to just go, gaping your mouth open, just kind of watching, looking at it all. There's a rhythm, and there's a beauty, and there's a organization, and it's awesome.
Man, I almost like the lawn better without the trees.
Oh, and the historical picture.
Oh my gosh, that historical photo is just.
Do you mean this etching? Because that's not a photo.
Man, it looks like it. That guy's good at drawing.
That's the iPhone one.
Yeah, but I mean, look at that. You can see the rhythms laid out so much more clearly here. And man, not to say that the trees add bad stuff to it. It just looks so good.
And there's anyway, it's an awesome place. And so
It's beauty and function. It's crazy.
Totally it is. And, it becomes a model for, how we should build today, and, how we should design and think about things.
Something that might be kind of fun to see. I'm just thinking about where I went to college, and SMU does have a similar layout. Now, it's not the exact same.
Well, if you look at Dallas Hall at SMU campus, you tell me what that building is supposed to be.
I mean, it's that. It's the library.
It's that library.
It's the same layout.
That's
and then it's
Dallas
got the whole
Hall
lawn.
at SMU, right?
Yep.
In fact,
That's crazy.
SMU was laid out to be like UVA, and you see the gardens and you see
the geometric designs, and then it actually continues all the way down to the boulevard.
Goes all the way down the boulevard. You're exactly right.
It doesn't have quite the same layout design as what's his face as UVA, but wow, I'm realizing right now the inspirations for that. It's really cool.
Yeah, there are other campuses.
That's a great photo of it.
That's a great picture.
That long boulevard is where I walk to class every day.
And so that organization layout clearly inspired from UVA and what he did there.
Well, and then so this is just something interesting that I just keep thinking about with this is like I wonder what the cost breakdown was of like how much UVA cost to set up like that for Thomas Jefferson to lay out something like that. And as we were talking about in another episode, like what would it take to plan something that beautiful and plan something like that in today's day and age? And we have a lot of those like city guys going crazy with the line and Tolosa or whatever. But what would it take to really get something like that going? It'd be awesome. It'd be awesome to have another Thomas Jefferson running the same play like that.
They're under the radar a little bit. I mean, there are great classical architects that are still doing beautiful, awesome stuff that,
You're going to shout them out? You put them on the radar?
I mean, A.M. Stern, okay, Robert Stern Architects is a classical architect that does universities, that does things like that. Friend down in San Antonio, Michael Ember, did a thing on Arkansas campus. You got Peter Penoyer, you got
cool.
Gil Schaefer, you've got some great architects who are venturing into the classical world or venturing into the academic and institutional world. Because, campuses are beginning to be ugly, right? And there's ugly buildings on them. And there's you go to Oxford and Cambridge to look at those buildings and see what you don't go, to these
TCC.
Yeah.
Right? It's just the architecture sometimes is what is the powerful event there.
Yeah, I don't know if you remember this, but when I was looking at colleges, when I was looking at A&M, I was going to be an engineering student, and their engineering program is cement blocks. That's their houses, or not houses, but like their buildings. So every engineering building at A&M was just like a giant cement rectangle.
Not real inspiring, is it?
Oh my gosh. It was very mathematical, that's for sure, but it was pretty frustrating. Like I remember walking out of there just being like, I don't know if I could like come here every day and be happy.
Uninspiring.
Yeah, it just felt
like Alcatraz.
Yeah. And that must be their new buildings, but the old ones were literally just cylinders.
Well, I mean, as we're getting into, kind of institutional architecture and stuff, pull up Boston City Hall. And this building has a little bit of it. There's a type of architecture called brutal architecture, and
Sounds
which is
fun. Oh wow!
And that is brutal architecture. Okay, and
I've seen some of that around here.
And brutal architecture is basically these. Basically the tragedy here is, and you can see Faneuil Hall. In the distance to the right, over to the right over there in the right corner, that's Faneuil Hall, right? That's a classical, building. And Boston City Hall, they tore down the most historic part of Boston to build that.
Yeah, Austin just had it up.
And when I was in North Bennett Street, that was Government Center. I took the train into Government Center and walked from Government Center through Faneuil Hall over to North Bennett Street. And it was just, it's all brick and concrete. And it's so uninviting. It's so uninspiring, and they've talked about tearing this building down for years.
They should.
But brutal architecture. Compare this to UVA campus, right? And so if we consider, we're kind of diving into classicism versus modernism, but there is a rationality and there is a human quality to this that is lost with brutalism and some of this modern architecture.
Wow.
On that Boston City Hall, it's really strange. If you're like standing in there and looking out the window, your view is completely obstructed by those like walls.
Yeah, the wall.
What the heck is that?
It's like blinders on a horse. Outside of
Get to work. Don't look out the window.
Crazy.
Yeah, it's apparently a pretty depressing thing, and apparently leaks quite a bit too. A lot of famous modern buildings leak because they have flat roofs.
The flat roof concept is crazy. Like when you think about, sorry, I know we're off the train of Thomas Jefferson, but when you think about an A-framed roof, or when you think about like all the curved roofs, like a pinnacle roof, like there's historical context behind it. Like it helps not leak.
Well, I think one reason why modern architects like the flat roof because it isn't traditional.
Right.
Right. It
sets them apart easily.
It's a rebellious teenager. Well, I'm going to be different. It's like, okay, but you're going to look like a goth kid when you're done with it.
or your roof's going to leak.
Yeah.
There's all these traditions behind steep pitched roofs, which were built and designed to handle snow load. And the reason that, English roofs are steeply pitched is because they had to deal with snow. And you go down to Tuscany or down in, the Mediterranean, all the roofs are much flatter or much, less of a pitch. They don't have the snow loads, right? They don't have the same requirements.
Yeah.
And then when you get into this modern era, they begin to have flat roofs.
And that's partially as a consequence of like concrete just being able to handle snow and other stuff like that, or
change in building materials, but also change in attitude about what a building should look like, how it should work.
So I know you say Jefferson, most of what we've been talking about, it's all Virginia. Did he build anywhere else?
No, and the influence that he has is a little bit, not only was he an architect, not only was he an influential one, but how far did his influence go, right? Was it outside of Virginia? Or, how many other houses do we not know about that he actually designed and helped with? And so that's, as I remember, he doesn't go outside of Virginia. But there's no doubt that classicism and the architecture that he is, inspiring and building, the State House in Virginia and things like that, is very influential to other states and to other things that are going on at the time. And the workmen that trained underneath Jefferson, okay, because by 1820, now he's got 5 or 6 master builders who have worked with him on various projects and now understand how to build in this way.
How many nails to use?
Yeah, and so he was training a whole generation of builders and architects underneath him that then continued to have a wave of influence, after him. So it isn't just the ones he had his fingerprint on; it's the ones that his builders, influenced later going forward.
That's one thing I noticed that really came to mind in the orders episode is like you can copy stuff and no one gets offended. Like if I copy one of your projects, you're going to be like, cool, that's awesome.
It'd be awesome.
But it's one of the few industries where copying is like a form of flattery.
Yeah. On the note of copying things, like, I think that is one of the drivers for a lot of people trying to be different, especially in this industry, because especially like as an artist, I think you want to set yourself apart. You want to be distinguished and known and one of the names to be remembered. And it is kind of ironic because there are a lot of architects that have like done something different and been remembered by it, which is cool. But then we're looking at Thomas Jefferson today, and I mean, looking at some of these things that are just breathtaking images of really well done architectural design, and he's just copied.
He's copied the Greeks.
And I would say his are arguably more memorable, more impressive, more like they speak to your soul. I don't know. I'm just looking at him like I'm comforted by that, and I'm less comforted by some of these modern architectural works.
There's a whole thing. You're exactly
I see
right.
What you're saying.
And there's a lot of the new urbanists, a lot of the classicists, lament the things that are being taught in modern architectural schools right now, because the goal is to be different. Okay, the goal is to do something original, and being original has become this mantra for being great. And so the reason Frank Gehry is chasing after all these sculptural and things is because that's the new cutting edge, that's the new frontier. And they would say, why do we want to go back? Why would we want to just copy the past? To your point, Richard, we're not copying the past. We're working within these frameworks to create something beautiful.
Right.
And so, they feel like they have to do this kind of thing in order to be original.
Yeah.
And there's stories of people getting sick in these buildings because you're walking through there and the walls are moving and everything else. And
the proportions don't speak to your mind in the same way that classical architecture does. And I even remember walking up the Leaning Tower of Pisa getting sick because you're going like this, and then you're like this, and then you're like this. And you're like
well, maybe this is where we end up is just talking about what architecture should be, right?
Yeah.
What should we be building and producing? Now, as builders and craftsmen, not architects, right? We're never going to build these things, right? Yeah. And so it's almost like sometimes you go into a modern art museum and you're like, there's a toilet there, a signed toilet, and you're like, wait a minute, something's being pulled over my eyes here, and so there are.
That's one that I'm like that's kind of cool.
They're paying for originality because the same thing that's happening in the modern art world is also happening with architecture, and so you end up with these spilled paint on a canvas, and we paid $50,000 for this, and you're like, wait a minute, what? And you're just like, or there's a fluorescent light hanging on the wall. They're like, yes, $20,000 we paid for this, and you're like, they're paying for originality. They're paying for this art. And
that gets me fired up.
It's just like it's hard, okay?
Yeah. If we want
to be sit there and go, that totally adds value. That's great.
We walked through the Fort Worth Museum of Modern Art. Me and my wife went on a little date, and like the staff was just getting mad at us because we were just like pointing and laughing at everything. Just like, what is this? And they're like kind of looking at us sideways.
Well, there's some beautiful things in there, like the wings in the book and things like that. That's in there is awesome. But there's other things that aren't so much, right?
Like a shirt stapled to the wall with mustard on it. It's like, it's crazy. I'm just like.
But take it back to architecture, right? When we see some of these things and we're like, why can't we do that? And there is a philosophy right now in the art and architecture world that's what's beautiful, and well, that's an historic building that they've attached this addition onto, and so and look, that one's not it looks like ribbons coming off the building. I mean,
I say that one's less offensive to me than the Boston building.
Yeah. Brutalism is really it's
in a word
hard.
Brutal.
Did you name it that?
No, that's the name for it. I think the word is based on, and we can do another word search if you want to make fun of me on this.
No, it's okay.
But there's brutal architecture. It's raw concrete, I think is what the term is.
Yikes. Well, if we want to jump back on the Jefferson train, or even architects like Jefferson, I do have a couple questions on it, and I know we'll get into this as we're looking into commercial architecture versus residential architecture in a future episode, so look forward to that. But I was curious about what Richard was saying. I mean, Thomas Jefferson only built in Virginia. Were there contemporaries of his who were kind of doing the same thing? Obviously, he takes an award home for being the most particular guy in his area, but were there other guys who were doing the same thing, hearkening back to that Palladian architecture?
Well, what I was going to say is the other influence that Jefferson had was on Washington, D.C., and he was the one who basically encouraged the competitions, for the White House and the state capitol. And so he was the one that said, we've got to have a competition for these things. And the reason why is that we really didn't have great architects in America at that time. Okay. Yeah. And, I think we did one on Charles Bulfinch, or we talked about him, or I've talked about him in Buildings and Brews. And Charles Bulfinch was an architect, very talented, did the Boston State House. He was actually couldn't get a job as an architect in the early 1800s, and he becomes the architect of record for the Capitol. There's his state building in Boston, And so, he's obviously an incredibly talented guy. He goes to Washington and kind of revives his career down there as the architect of the Capitol. And so
Previously, where was he?
Boston. He
He was in
oversaw the building of the White House, of the Capitol, and was making sure it got built right. Now the fascinating thing. Now we look at this building right here, right? The state Capitol is just a massive thing. If you pull up Bullfinch's Capitol in 1820, it was a timber framed building, right? And so
Wow.
this is a steel structure that happens after the Civil War. There's pictures of Abraham Lincoln giving his inaugural address, and the state capitol not being finished. And so we look at it today and go, well, I guess it's always looked like that. No, it didn't look like that in the early 1800s. The state capitol. Remember that in 1815, what were there? 14 colonies or 14 states. And America exploded after that time. Texas becomes a state in 1845, California in 1850, right? So it's really, after 1830 that America begins to expand, and you have these much grander buildings. And the dome, I think in Bullfinch's age was timber frame and is much smaller. So anyway, this is another example of us forgetting, the way things used to be. There it is.
And that is crazy, just because even there's a small version of the ABC thing that we were talking about earlier.
Yeah.
And then if we look at today's version of the Capitol, they do ABC, because there's the additions that are on the left and right side that. But man, it's
There's
exciting.
a lot of balance still there and everything.
No, yeah, I know, but the original ABC was those two little rotundas.
Yeah,
is that
no,
what they
you're
call it?
right.
And the
They've
extended
added those
ABCs.
wings on. And so here is where Jefferson was really encouraging beauty in the state capitol. Here was Jefferson really, encouraging quality in the buildings that were going to represent America. Now, the state capitol kept growing and growing and growing, and so it changed a number of times. But the White House was certainly one that he influenced, and I'm pretty sure Jefferson put in one of his designs was for the White House. It didn't end up getting. James Hoban, I believe, was the architect of the White House. Anyway, the point being that you asked who else. There was an original question, who else was influential?
Yeah.
And the country just didn't have much influence architecturally. Okay, we were very naive and young. And in my talks, I really say the profession of architecture doesn't really happen until 1820, 1830, when guys like Benjamin Latrobe comes to America. He's an English architect who comes. He's actually the first, and Jefferson hires Latrobe to be the architect of the Capitol, and then Bullfinch follows Latrobe, and so. And then after Latrobe, you have Robert Mills. After Bullfinch, you have Robert Mills, James Strickland. Those guys train under Latrobe. And so really you're talking about in the early 1820s, America is just getting its feet, kind of planted of architectural integrity. And so Jefferson's at the very early start of that. So he encouraged competitions. He encouraged, building better. He encouraged these things. But he really... That's kind of where his influence says, and it's significant. It's powerful.
It is. Yeah, because the school, you said SMU, was like a copy of the UVA, right?
Yeah.
And then UVA is like him copying Palladio, and Palladio's copying what, Greeks?
The Pantheon. So
and then now we're all looking back at all of those,
right?
And it's major influence still.
So Jefferson did have a design for the White House. This is it. What does that look like? The Villa Rotunda, which is a Palladian building. I'm sure there was a whole philosophy on why it was supposed to look like that and supposed to be like that. And so,
the cardinal directions, I think, is a big influence. It's got the four. That one entrance there. Oh, yeah, there it is. The Villa Rotunda. I see what you're saying. That's really cool. I think that'll wrap up our conversation about Thomas Jefferson. You got any big takeaways from this one?
For me, it is everything builds on itself.
Yeah.
Like I just mentioned, we're all kind of copying, the past. So I like that. I like that he did it, and there's the freedom to do that.
Totally.
And he made some beautiful buildings.
Yeah, I think the biggest takeaway that I had is, I mean, he has really done one of the more beautiful things I think I've ever seen. The UVA campus is just breathtaking, and it's just taking from other people. I mean, it's literally just steal it and use it and reuse it. And, with the change in materials and other things, like looking at the original, like, Palladian designs of the Pantheon, is that what it was? Looking at the Pantheon, it was much larger bricks. And then when you look at Thomas Jefferson's, the stone bricks. But then when you look at Thomas Jefferson's, like, use of the smaller bricks and wood, and it provides a different feel to it, but still gives the same impressions off. Is really interesting.
I think what always blows me away is, if he'd just written the Declaration of Independence, that'd have been enough. If he had just, led.
Forgot we're talking about one of those guys.
Yeah,
that's crazy.
He's a founding father, right?
Yeah.
He's, as if he didn't do enough, and then to find out that he was also this very influential architect, very influential designer, very influential, leader, and it kind of blows your mind. You're just like, who was this freaking dude, right? It's not fair, right? That he would be able to do so much and just influence so much. And so, I'm jealous because he had a huge library. And in fact,
Nerd.
He sold one of his libraries, and that's the library that started the Library of Congress.
Wow.
Will you stop doing incredible things, right? Just like, come on, just making us all look silly. But no, he's, that's what blows me away is just all the freaking things that he did. And yet on top of that, he was this designer. He's like David in the Bible. Not only was he a great warrior, a poet,
king.
Just king everything, right? It's just, he did everything.
It does make you kind of jealous.
Yeah.
Like,
so
That's wacky.
yeah. So that's good stuff.
Well, thanks, guys, for watching this episode of Passion for Craft podcast. Join our Patreon. Join the Discord. We would love to have you over there. Get some fun, extra inside info from Brent's library, and then get to see some of those things done practically with Richard. So we'd love to have you over there. Thanks for watching.